Welcome to the program. My friend Rick Sincere joins me. Rick is a former chairman of the Libertarian Party of Virginia, a contributing editor at The Bearing Drift, Virginia's conservative voice, and he is a longtime member of the Charlottesville Electoral Board. Welcome to the program.
Oh, great to be here.
I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, I should say I'm retired from the Electoral Board.
Oh, you are retired?
But I was on for 12 years.
Okay.
And actually, I have a piece in Bearing Drift this week about how electoral boards operate and how it contributes to the integrity and transparency of the electoral system.
Okay, so I want to talk about that. And but before we do, just Rick, general thoughts. As somebody who has been involved in the Libertarian Party, in the Republican Party, throughout your professional career in politics, general thoughts about this historic and unprecedented election, at least in a modern age, unprecedented election that we've seen for president this year.
It will go down in history as the hyperbole election of 2016. Everything was blown up far out of proportion. Both sides were demonizing each other more than we've ever seen before. I mean, even going back 8 years, John McCain and Barack Obama treated each other with respect. You're not seeing that this year. I mean, both Donald Trump, whose calling card is the insult tweet, and Hillary Clinton, who likes to smirk a lot. There's no respect between these two characters, although I think before the history books are written, we're going to find out that Hillary and Bill Clinton encouraged Donald Trump to run for president this year so that Hillary could be elected.
You buy into that theory, that he was some kind of mole and
They're old friends. You've got pictures of Donald Trump golfing with Bill Clinton, and they were at each other's weddings, and they go back a long way. And we do know that before Donald Trump decided to run for president, he called Bill Clinton for advice. And somewhere in that email stash is an email from Hillary Clinton saying, what can we do to get Donald Trump in the race? And she made a speech in 2013 saying it would be good for people like Donald Trump to run for president. This is going to come
out. What did she mean by that, though?
Well, she meant that people with business experience should run. But she used Donald Trump's name as an example. That's no accident. I think we're going to find out over time, maybe before the election, maybe before the end of 8 years of Hillary Clinton in the White House, we're going to find out that Hillary Clinton chose Donald Trump to be her opponent this year.
Now, you and I, of course, have talked on the radio many times, and you have been a supporter of Gary Johnson this year. But before we get to Gary Johnson, how do you make sense of the GOP this year? And so many people who, if they saw the behavior that we have seen in Donald Trump, if they saw that in a family member, if they saw that in a neighbor, certainly if they saw that in a Democratic candidate for president, the moral outrage would be so palpable. And yet we have seen it contained, controlled, muted in some cases, as they've said, you know, team first. Not principles first, team first.
Well, that's exactly what's happening. Politics is a team sport in this case. And I see it on Facebook where people are critical of people. Congressman Scott Ridgell, for example, retiring from the 2nd District of Virginia. He's a Republican. He endorsed Gary Johnson for president, and people are coming down on him and saying, "Hey, you're not playing with our team. You're wrong." And so I posted on Facebook. Imagine a politician putting principle before party. It's outrageous. And people agreed with me as though I was not being sarcastic. It is really disturbing. And
it is.
And you see something of the same thing going on the Democratic side, with people going along with Hillary Clinton being the anointed one, even though they would have preferred somebody like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
But
there are millions of Democrats who will push, pull, or whatever it is, that lever for Hillary Clinton, who would much rather have voted for Bernie Sanders.
Right, and the difference between the Democrats and Republicans this year, at least the traditional Republicans who would have opposed Donald Trump during the primary season and probably don't like Donald Trump and won't secretly won't vote for him, but they're not endorsing him, is that across the Democratic Party and liberal politics, there's satisfaction with Hillary Clinton, but not enthusiasm. Whereas with the Republicans, they're dissatisfied with Donald Trump. And that's why he's probably going to be polling at less than 40% on election night. He's going to be trounced, or as Gary Johnson put it when he was here in Charlottesville a couple weeks ago, he's going to be thumped. Thumped.
And a lot of Republicans will be surprised at that.
And pleased. They'll be pleased because it'll provide an opportunity to rebuild the party. And so the Trump people will have, they're going to blame the establishment for Donald Trump's loss, which shouldn't come as a surprise because Donald Trump has been attacking the establishment from the very beginning, and then he complains when the establishment does not support him. He should know better. So your regular run-of-the-mill Republicans who have been stuffing envelopes and making phone calls and working to recruit candidates for city council, county board of supervisors,
all those down ballot races.
Yeah, they're going to breathe a sigh of relief that Donald Trump is out of the picture. At least as far as party politics goes.
Yeah.
He's been holding up his middle finger to the Republican Party from the very beginning, and he's going to walk out that door and he's going to start a TV network or something, but he's not going to be involved in party politics.
He'll definitely
anymore.
capitalize on the audience that he has created.
Yeah, and he's already started. He's already started doing these live Facebook feeds from his headquarters.
I was shocked at that weeks before this election, that his campaign would have the time and the resource, and they don't. The time and the resources to all of a sudden start this new live Facebook stream news program. They don't have the time for that if they want to win an election, but I don't think they're focused on winning an election. I think they're focused on pivoting to create the next Fox News, the next Rush Limbaugh.
They're not doing anything that is related to election winning. They're not engaging in traditional get out the vote efforts. They're not canvassing door to door. They're not making phone calls. They don't have the organization to do that. Donald Trump himself has dismissed the data-driven campaigning that got Barack Obama elected in 2008 and reelected in 2012. He says it doesn't matter. It's all personality. And as far as Donald Trump is concerned, it is all personality. This has always been about him and his name and building his brand and getting people to stay at his brand new hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., which is the closest he's ever going to get to sleeping in the White House.
So how did this happen? How did this happen with the electoral process in the GOP that we saw? Did it have something to do, Rick, with so many candidates who stayed in for so long that they kept splitting the anti-Trump vote?
That was part of it. And the other part of it was that all those candidates refused to attack Donald Trump from the outset because they thought he was just a flash in the pan. They did not take him seriously enough as a motivating force for voters in the primaries. And so people like Jeb Bush or John Kasich or even Ted Cruz were trying to remain above the fray when they should have been going for the gut. And they weren't. They didn't attack Donald Trump when they should have, and as a result, he was able to get away with winning the primaries.
You know what I've been thinking the past few weeks is that there's a difference, as you know, there's a difference between running a primary campaign to win a nomination for a party and then pivoting to run a general campaign to win a nomination among an electorate.
Right.
That includes people who aren't in your party who disagree with you.
And Donald Trump has not done that pivot.
He never pivoted. And he's still running the primary campaign that's all about pleasing a base. That's all about constantly throwing red meat to a base.
And more than that, it's not just pleasing a base. It's speaking before rallies of enthusiastic core supporters who are cheering for you and feeding your ego. And rather than going out and trying to get votes from people who may be on the fence or maybe even fundamentally disagree, he's just wallowing in the praise of his core constituents. And that's not a way to win an election.
No,
if you
it's
add
about
up
a third of the GOP electorate, and it's maybe 40% of the American electorate,
and
right?
if you just look at the people who are attending his rallies, if you added up everybody who goes to a Donald Trump rally across the country from the beginning of the primary season to now, you may have 1 million people, tops. And those are his most fervent supporters, the ones who are willing to wait in line for 4 or 5 hours to get into an arena.
And they believe in him. And what do they believe in, Rick? What is it? Because these people, I'm the first one to say, there's a lot of stuff they believe in that I believe in. There's so much about the system that's corrupted. Washington has turned its back on the working poor and the middle class. We continue to embrace policies that make the rich richer and destroy the opportunities for everybody else. We continue to make the worst mistakes on the global stage that every great empire before us has made. I think they're right about those things.
They are right, but I think they're aiming their ire in the wrong direction. A lot of what has affected the middle class, the working class in America, has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with technology. We're not shipping jobs overseas, we're replacing jobs with robots. And every place in the country where they're raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, you are seeing your fast food outlets replacing workers with machines in which you place your orders, so that an entire McDonald's or Wendy's can be run by a single individual. And
there's only going to be, I'm sure we could split the hairs of that argument, but let's just say there's only going to be more of that. There's only going to, I mean, the people I've talked to about automation that's coming, in our generation, the next generation, the one after that, we're going to see the automation of what we now consider really good white-collar jobs. Doctors, lawyers. I mean, there's going to be certain levels of automation that it's going to move into those careers that will displace college graduates and professionals.
Well, we've seen it happening in journalism already, where, believe it or not, some small-town newspapers are outsourcing their city council reporting to India. Because the city council meeting is on free TV, and you're just like here in Charlottesville. You've got it on public access TV. So they've got some guy in India watching the feed and writing everything down and turning it into a news article.
Global Village, right?
Right. and so you don't have to hire somebody to actually go to the city council meeting to cover it.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Let's take a quick break.
Okay.
And we'll pick up right where we left off. We're talking with Rick Sincere, a contributing editor at The Bearing Drift. It's Virginia's conservative voice. I'm Coy Barefoot. Stay with me. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking with Rick Sincere. He's a contributing editor at The Bearing Drift. It's bearingdrift.com. Rick, let me ask you about the Trump campaign and the Pence campaign. They seem to be two very different campaigns in many significant ways.
After the third presidential debate, I think it was, Jimmy Kimmel on Jimmy Kimmel Live on ABC did a piece in which he showed Trump and Pence debating each other because they were taking diametrically opposite positions on issues. And here's one that came up in the news today as on my way to the studio. Mike Pence said it's very serious because the Russians are hacking the DNC's emails and other things, whereas Donald Trump for the past several weeks has been insisting that there's no proof that the Russians are involved with that at all. But Mike Pence says it's clear, the Russians are behind it. And you can go after issue after issue after issue. Mike Pence, Donald Trump's hand-chosen running mate, is opposed to Donald Trump on all the issues.
Issue after issue after issue.
Right.
All the way down the list.
And Mike Pence, whether you agree or disagree with him, is a seasoned professional statesman. I mean, he's been a member of Congress, he's been a governor, he's also been a talk show host, but he knows the issues. Donald Trump is completely disengaged from issues. He just says whatever comes into his mind, and if people applaud, he goes with it.
What's Pence doing to his career?
He's deep sixing it. The best he can hope for is that some small college chooses him to be its president, and then he can retire gracefully that way.
How does the GOP recover from this? Because we need a strong conservative party in America. It's always been there. Well, it's always been part of the mix that we've had that sentiment, that dynamic in the American electorate at the table, responsibly engaged in the conversations as we wrestle with the challenges that face us. We need that party there.
I've been asking Republican politicians precisely that question. I interviewed Bob Goodlatte, the 6th District Congressman, Tom Garrett, who's running for Congress here in the 5th District. I said to them, how does the Republican Party recover from Donald Trump? And they refused to take my bait because they are at least paying lip service to supporting Donald Trump. But I think that deep down they recognize that the party has to go through some catharsis. Are
they just going to try to take a mulligan on this and gaslight the electorate and pretend like, oh, no, that wasn't that bad.
Well,
that didn't really happen.
10 years from now, you're going to see people who are major Donald Trump supporters saying, I never met the guy. You know, and they're going to try to claim that they had nothing to do with his rise and fall. But this may actually be good for the Republican Party, because there has been a real friction within various fractions of the Republican Party. You've got sort of the economic libertarians, laissez-faire, let the chips fall where they may. You've got the social conservatives who think that the government should micromanage what you do in your bedroom, and you've got sort of a country club Republicans.
They like that corporate welfare,
Bush family, and this may be an opportunity for the Republican Party to grapple with its demons and come out of it stronger because of it. But meanwhile, the Democratic Party is not going through this, but there are real problems beneath the surface in the Democratic Party, which has always been a very loose coalition of groups that really don't have a lot in common other than that they're Democrats. Hillary Clinton is sort of the figurehead of that coalition, but I think you're going to see a lot of squabbling going on after she gets elected and when she's unable to deal with the Republican Congress. And but they're putting a happy face on it because they're behind their candidate, whereas the Republicans can actually be arguing right now because they don't support their candidate.
Right.
But the Democratic Party may suffer because they are not dealing with these problems now.
So it raises an important point that I actually put on Facebook recently, that we're not having the national conversation about the pros and cons of a Hillary Clinton presidency, which is most likely what we're going to be looking at. Nate Silver has had her at an 85% plus chance of winning for weeks.
Yeah, I think the Center for Politics at UVA shows her with 352 electoral votes if the election were today.
In all likelihood, in all probability, she will be president. But we're not really having that conversation about what that will mean for the country.
No.
Because Donald Trump has sucked all the air out of the room and made every moment about this election about himself. And we're going to pay the price for that, because there are pros and cons.
The closest thing we've got to that was a leak that came out about 24 hours ago that Hillary Clinton plans on asking Joe Biden to be her Secretary of State, which is really interesting because there were rumors 4 years ago that Barack Obama was going to do a flip and ask Hillary Clinton to run for vice president and make Joe Biden Secretary of State. That didn't pan out, I think because Clinton didn't want to do it. But Joe Biden would be a natural Secretary of State. He was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee for 12, 15
He'd probably be
years.
Great, yeah.
And it would be a capstone for his career. But that, we're not talking about any other potential Clinton cabinet members right now, but we should be. We should know who's going to be running Health and Human Services, who's going to be running the Defense Department, because Hillary Clinton's a big war hawk. And we want to know whether it's going to be somebody like Robert Gates, who is willing to speak truth to power, or if it's going to be someone who's going to be obsequious and do whatever Hillary wants.
And put those troops on the ground in plenty of hotspots around the world, which is...
And take out Bashir Assad and create more chaos in the Middle East.
Yeah. Rick, you have an article that is soon to be published in the Richmond Times-Dispatch regarding the electoral process.
Right.
And you also have many years behind you, a dozen years having served on the Charlottesville Electoral Board. And here we are looking at a huge election in front of us. What crosses your mind?
Well, I have a piece in Bearing Drift this week about the transparency of the electoral process, because Donald Trump has been bleating about the process being rigged, and apparently it's borne fruit, because there was a poll that came out that said that 43% of Americans do not trust that their vote's going to be counted. So I wrote a piece that showed how in every step of the process it's transparent, and that the press and the public can scrutinize how the election is being held, from the testing of the election equipment before the election, to being in the polling place on election day, to being part of the canvass after the election, even if it goes to a recount. It is always transparent and open to the public, and you can observe what's going on if you choose to do so. If you don't want to participate in that observation process, then you can be as suspicious as you want. But it's clear that it would be very difficult to rig an election, because you've got eyes on
Unless you're in
everything.
Alabama and it's the middle of the night and you want to figure out how you can come up with at least 5,000 votes to so Sigmund won't win the
or in
governorship.
Texas. And then on the other hand, I've got this piece in the Richmond Times-Dispatch this weekend talking about how presidential electors, the people you actually vote for on election day, you don't vote for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or Gary Johnson, you vote for a slate of electors chosen by the Democratic, Republican, or Libertarian parties.
Right.
And I argue in this piece in the Times-Dispatch that presidential electors should be free to follow their conscience. And in particular, in states that Donald Trump wins in this election, those electors who are chosen by the Republican Party should feel free to vote for Gary Johnson or somebody else, so they are not tainted as having voted for the most unfit candidate for president who's ever been on the ballot.
It's a federal election, so
Right.
are there federal codes or regulations?
No, actually, there's been very little law or litigation regarding the role of the presidential elector. We know how they should be chosen. Originally, they were chosen by state legislatures. Starting in about 1828, they were elected by popular vote. Some states have laws that require electors to vote for the candidate they are pledged to if that candidate wins the popular vote.
Virginia is one.
Virginia's one, but it's never really been tested. There have been a handful of what are called faithless electors, including one here in Albemarle County. Roger McBride in 1972 was pledged to vote for Richard Nixon. Instead, he voted for the first Libertarian presidential ticket, John Hospers and Tony Nathan, giving Tony Nathan the first vote in the Electoral College ever received by a woman. 12 years before Geraldine
A
Ferraro.
delegate from Albemarle County did that.
Yeah, and but he was not punished.
Even though the law says if you're voted to go to the Electoral College and vote for this candidate, you must legally do that. But there was no repercussion.
What few court decisions there have been about this issue have said a presidential elector is free to vote however he wants once he's elected. The pledge that he makes towards his candidate is a moral pledge, not a legal one. So I say, all you GOP electors out there, not in Virginia, Virginia's going to go for Hillary Clinton, but out, in West Virginia, in North Carolina, wherever, if you don't want to vote for Donald Trump, vote for Gary Johnson or some other suitable candidate.
So you're making a call, as a conservative, you're making the call for principle over party.
Absolutely.
Let's focus on our principles, not on the team.
Yeah, the only wasted vote you have is when you vote for somebody that you don't agree with. Don't vote for somebody because you think they can win. Vote for somebody because they stand up for the values and the issues that you care about.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm supporting Gary Johnson for president.
And you have supported Gary Johnson this year.
Right.
Tell me about the media coverage of Gary Johnson and reflect on that, because it seemed like the only time he made headlines is when he was misspeaking or he made a gaffe, and yet the major candidates were misspeaking and then they had gaffes all the time.
Yeah, well, for example, Gary Johnson was criticized for not knowing what Aleppo was when he was asked on a TV program with no warning that he was going to be asked a question about foreign policy. He admitted it was a mistake.
For those who haven't read the transcript of that interview, they're not discussing foreign policy at all.
No.
All of a sudden, out of the blue, somebody says, "What about Aleppo?" And he says, in retrospect, "I thought we were still on this topic that we had been talking about. I didn't know you were changing the subject."
But then Hillary Clinton in the last debate didn't know where Mosul was on the eve of the attack that's going to liberate Mosul. She said Mosul was on the border with Syria. It's 100 miles from the border with Syria. Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State, doesn't know basic geography, and yet Gary Johnson gets raked over the coals for not knowing what Aleppo was when he was asked out of context.
Yeah.
I think that overall, the Libertarian Party ticket of Gary Johnson for president, Bill Weld for vice president, has got a lot more attention from the press and the public than previous Libertarian candidates have gotten.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Just as an example, at the Libertarian Party convention this year, there were over 200 press credentials issued, whereas at the convention 4 years previous, there were only about 10. So I mean, even back in May, there was a lot more attention being paid. I think this was a missed opportunity for the Libertarians this year. It was really important for the polls to show Gary Johnson at 15% so he could get into those presidential debates.
Would have changed a lot.
But the Commission on Presidential Debates set the bar too high. The companies asking the polling questions were not asking, do you want to vote for Gary Johnson? The way they put the question was, do you want to vote for Hillary Clinton or do you want to vote for Donald Trump? If your answer was other, then they would say, well, which other? But there was never, do you want to vote for Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, or Gary Johnson?
Yeah.
So he could never get to that 15%. It was rigged to use Donald Trump's term.
Rick, thank you for being here.
It was great.
I appreciate it. Rick Sincere, he's at bearingdrift.com, and you can also find him online at ricksincere.com as well. I'm Coy Barefoot. Right now I have for you Barefoot Excursions from the Historic Archive. We'll take a trip up to the UVA corner and get a little information about the historic White Spot Diner. Enjoy. Hi, I'm Coy Barefoot here at the legendary White Spot Diner on the UVA corner. Let me tell you how the White Spot got its name. Back in 1953, Paul Dunsmore had a newsstand on the corner, but his dream was to open a diner. And this space finally became available when the University Beauty Salon, which had been sitting here for decades, moved to a different location. When they moved the salon, they took the big salon chairs with them. So Paul Dunsmore moves in here, sets up his diner, and one day he's in here painting the walls white. And he looks down and notices on the floor a big round stain where the beauty salon chair had been sitting for the last few decades. Instead of replacing the whole floor, he just reached down with his paintbrush and covered in that spot on the floor with white paint. And the White Spot Diner was born, 1953. Its first signature menu item was a hot dog covered with bacon and cheese. But in the early 1960s, a university doctor would come in on occasion and order a hamburger with an egg on top for extra protein. That item became so popular, they named it after him, and the Gus Burger was born.